Hey there, everybody. Thanks very much for joining. So hopefully you know why we're here. It's all to talk about the pitfalls of working with recruiters and why it often feels frustrating and expensive. Now, my background, if you're not aware, is recruitment through and through. So I guess I'm both biased and also have seen a fair bit over the years, good, bad, and ugly, when it comes to recruitment businesses, running my own business, and increasingly getting an understanding as to how the industry has a lot going for it, but there's many parts of the model that is broken. So if you're watching live, then please do add in comments, questions along the way. And if you're watching this on replay, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments on the video for others to see. Now, where's this all come about from? I guess partly is my own personal view, where there is much about my industry that I love, but also a lot of the bits that don't necessarily tie together in the way that align the incentives between what we want to be doing and what the clients that we work with want to be doing. But also, I deliver a number of workshops, some to venture capital firms, some to people like the Royal Academy of Engineering, and increasingly towards the end of those sessions, one of the founders or leaders will come up to me and say, Alan, great session. We've been talking about hiring execs or building culture as you scale, whatever the topic of the workshop is. But can you tell me actually about working with recruiters? I find it incredibly frustrating. It can be really expensive. We think that we need to use a recruiter, but we're not really sure how to engage with them and how to go about thinking on the different models and the language, etc. So I'm having these conversations privately, and I thought what would be really useful is to share this publicly. And I get that when people talk about recruiters, you would perhaps put us somewhere between estate agents and politicians in terms of trust. And I think that's really valid in some way. But what I don't see being understood truly, and my aim to share today, is how the models within recruitment, some of the choices that you might make, will drive incentives with the recruitment companies you're looking to work with that will heavily influence their behaviors. And it may well be you're making choices at the outset when you're choosing who to work with or how to engage with recruiters, and you don't necessarily understand how those are following through in practice. So let me just do a tech check to make sure it's coming through okay, which looks like it is. Brilliant. So what I am going to run through today is framing it through the lens of choices. So those choices that you will all be making in some way or another, often without realizing it. The first is the payment structure with the recruitment business you work with. And a big element of that is whether you're paying something, an element upfront, or whether you're paying it all on success. How many recruiters is the right number to work with? I've definitely got my views on that, but also we'll try and unpick how it might, your choice of 1, 2, 3 or more will influence some of the incentives and behaviors. How quickly you might want to see CVs. Often it's as quick as possible, but what does that mean for the types of candidates you might see? How many CVs you want to see, and what are the different choices when you're thinking about volume of CVs versus the conversation around the CVs that you're getting. How pricing works, so percentage of salary is a pretty familiar one, I think, if you've used recruitment companies, but talk about some of the pros and cons of that and some of the alternatives, and then help you understand the activity you're looking for versus the judgment you're getting, and then what you might really value. So I'm aiming not to be preachy or pitch my own book as part of this conversation, but really help to run through some of the choices that you're thinking about and how that might influence the recruiter you work with, whether that's my business, ISL Talent, or whether it's another recruiter that you're looking to engage with. So that first consideration there, paying upfront versus paying on success. Now, just in terms of demystifying some of the language, contingency recruitment is a label that I use. I'm not sure how familiar it is with others. That's typically used to talk about no win, no fee. So you go to a recruiter or you go to a number of recruiters, you ask them to help you find people. Financially, you're only committing at the end of that process when they find somebody. And that bill only arrives often when they start, maybe when they accept an offer. So from a risk point of view, many founders and hiring managers I talk to see that as brilliant because they're shifting the risk onto the recruiter and only paying on success. The alternative that is often with a retained business model is paying an element upfront. Now that might be a third, and maybe then you pay 2/3 as a success fee. That's typically what we do with an ISL talent. It might be you're paying a really small amount to begin with, 500 or £1,000, so almost a token amount to begin with, but there is some upfront element. And then the rest will be paid on success. And if you go to an exec headhunter, a Shrek, maybe there's a much more kind of standard, a third of the fees from taking the assignment on to delivering a long list and short list and getting candidates to interviews. So as ever, there's a load of different things here, but I think paying upfront and paying on success is the main choice you may have. Now, on one level, paying only on success pushes all the risk away from you. That's the best way to get options without having to pay for them. And I can see the benefit of that. And we've hired many roles for our clients where we're only paid on success. The paying upfront element, then it does involve some financial commitment for you. And that is clearly something that then does create risk. But I think perhaps what people don't understand so much is how that balance of risk and commitment can often mean that it's not giving you the cost you might want. And by that, I mean, when we are working as recruiters, then we look at fill rate for jobs as one of our key metrics. So if we acquire 10 jobs, how many of them are we seeing a financial return on? So are we placing all 10 of those? Are we placing 2 of those, 5 of those? And that fill rate is important when it comes to the payment side of things. So a few years ago at ISL Talent, when we talked about goals for the year, I remember standing up at one of our annual conferences and saying, right, this year we're going to aim to improve our fill rate to 1 in 5. So for every 5 jobs that we take on and we put effort into working, we will place 1 in 5. And as I say that now, it seems somewhat crazy because if you haven't worked through the maths around that, it means we're not getting paid for 80% of the work that we're doing. So 4 times out of 5, we will work on a role and not get paid for that. Now, of course, there's things that will influence the percentage chance. So not all roles will be born equally, not all roles will be 1 in 5. If you've got real strong commitment, if a client's working with you exclusively, you're able to send CVs without interviews, then you're much more likely to fill that role versus one where you're putting CVs into a portal, there's 5 other recruiters, and that maybe becomes much more like a 1 in 10 role. But that fill rate clearly then influences behaviors. So if as a recruiter, you know you're only going to place 1 in 5 of the roles you're working on, then you can argue logically you're going to put in 20% of the effort to that, or you're going to somewhat spray and pray. You're going to treat those 5 roles as a little bit of a lottery. Maybe there's some that seem safer bets than others, but you're really going to be conscious that the majority of the roles that you work on aren't going to get paid. So bringing it back to, if you're listening on this and thinking about hiring or gone through a hiring process, do you really want to be putting it on the recruiter that they're only going to put 20, 30, 40% effort in? Or maybe there's this leap of faith to make a financial commitment, but once you're doing that, you're working with a company on an exclusive basis. They may not see the role as 100% likely to be filled, being fair, but there's a lot more chance that they see that as an outcome where they can drive towards a success fee that is likely rather than unlikely. So those fill rates for your recruiters, I would definitely talk to recruiters about percentage of roles that they're filling, they're acquiring, and think about how that might mean it aligns with the incentives that they're looking at. So the next consideration is one recruiter versus many. So your choice is, actually, do I work with just one recruiter or do I work with a couple of recruiters here? And there's a few different considerations around that. Now, some of it links into what I was covering a minute ago around retainers, exclusivity, no win, no fee. You're not logically going to go out there and pay 3 different recruiters an upfront fee. So to a certain extent, if you're deciding to work with multiple recruiters, you're almost certainly going to be working with them on a contingency or a no win, no fee basis. If you're working with one recruiter, that might be because you're working with them on a retainer. It might be you're still working with them on a no-win, no-fee basis, but you are giving them the exclusive commitment that they perhaps value. But that choice of one recruiter versus many, I think that I've spoken to many people who say, I'm going to work with 2 or 3 recruiters because it increases our chances of getting the role filled. It will allow them to reach more of the market, and it means we will get a wider pool of candidates. And I understand the thinking behind that. But what I've seen in reality, what I've seen in my business, within the recruitment industry as a whole, is as soon as you widen the net to multiple recruiters, coming back to the fill rate, there's a much lower chance that they are going to get success. So the behaviors that you're driving will influence that. Also, it becomes a model working with multiple recruiters where you're much more focused on optimizing for speed rather than someone that can go deep into the market. So if you come to my business and say, Alan, we're going to work with 3 recruiters, we'd want you to be one of them. Well, firstly, where we are at the moment, I would say thanks, but no thanks. But if I was to engage with you, then straight away I'm thinking there's 2 other recruiters out there. I need to make sure I get my CVs to you as quickly as possible. What that probably means is I'm going with the CVs I have close to hand. I'm going with CVs for campaigns I've already run that I'm recycling, and there is some value in that. I am posting an advert and finding active candidates, people that are going to respond quickly. I can get their CV across to you in 24 hours. What I'm probably not doing, because of the way the incentives go, where you're working with multiple recruiters and it almost becomes a first past the post, what I'm unlikely to be able to justify doing is spending time reaching passive candidates. The 80 or 90% of people out there that are open to new opportunities but aren't actually searching job boards. And so what you end up with is a high volume of CVs, but only representing the 15 or 20% of people in the market. And coming back to effort again, then one of the things that you'll find is you're kind of hoping, if I can bring this slide up here, you're kind of hoping that you go through recruiters, they all put in 100% effort, and you as a client get a great result because you've got 3 people working on your behalf. You're only paying the one that gets that great candidate over the line. Brilliant. What I think is more likely in practice is that you work with 3 recruiters, they put in 33% effort. And that effort is really on the first part of the market, the active candidates, the people that are a lot closer to them. Whereas if you were to go with one recruiter, there's much more chance, not a guarantee, they would put in 100% effort. So the difference here between engaging with 3 recruiters, hearing their pitches, their proposals, understanding the credibility they have within the market, and then choosing one to commit to working with. The difference in how much effort they're going to put in is a big part of it. And just be realistic. If you're going through recruiters to reach more of the market, it may be that it's achieving entirely the opposite of what you're looking for, where it's actually bringing you less candidates that are out there. So that's all about that choice between one and multiple recruiters, illustrated here with 3 recruiters. So I'm going to move on to talk about how quickly you might want CVs. Like I said, if there's any questions or comments, I know a couple of people had sent through some earlier on, which I'm making sure to address. If there's anything else that's come up that you want to revisit and make sure I cover, then please add in the comments along the way. So how quickly you might want CVs is one of the choices you're making. And the majority of people I talk to, being realistic, they say, we want this person filled. We want this role filled as soon as possible. So we really want to see CVs quickly. We want to make sure that we're getting this gap filled. And I get that, I've gone to hire for many roles myself, and there's always a certain sense of urgency around that. But if you are asking for CVs quickly, if you're saying, we want to see people next week, we want to see CVs in the next couple of days, one of the risks there is, once again, you're really tapping into that active talent pool, the people that have already registered as looking for work, the people that are going to respond to a job advert on the day it's posted, whether they're doing it manually or whether they're using ChatGPT or some sort of AI tool to automate the posting. there is a real danger that asking for CVs quickly means that you're seeing the active candidates. A recruiter who's under orders to put CVs to you within a matter of days is very unlikely to be able to invest the time to engage with passive candidates. Those passive candidates that are in jobs, at events, head down, working away, coding, selling, whatever their function is, they're not going to be responding within hours, minutes to recruiter messages. They're not going to be responding to adverts. They won't be looking for those as part of their daily activities. It may take 2 or 3 outreach messages to get them to a point where there's a conversation. Maybe they want to see a bit more about the company before they jump on a phone call with your recruiter. So that time from approaching or identifying somebody to having a conversation with them, maybe 1, 2, or 3 weeks, versus the active candidates you can reach in a matter of hours, sometimes minutes. So if your instruction to your recruiter is, I need CVs as soon as possible, but realistically, I want to see CVs in the next 2 days, I want to interview next week and get this role filled, then of course, a lot of these roles you're recruiting for are going to be urgent, but you may well be pushing your recruiter towards these active candidates. That in itself is not a problem. There's some great candidates out there that are actively looking for work, but you're pushing the recruiter to look at the best people on the market at the moment rather than in the market. So you need to be aware of that. Whereas if you have a process that you need to move through with velocity and move people through quickly, but you are a bit more open to waiting 2 or 3 weeks to see CVs, then you may well open up a much broader talent pool. And I'd encourage you to think about, in the whole scheme of things, if you're pitching this as the most important role you're going to hire in the next 6 months, in the whole scheme of things, is that extra week or 2 going to make a difference come the end of the year to the impact the candidate has made? Perhaps not. Is it going to make a difference to the breadth and depth of candidates that you see? Then I think it definitely will make a significant difference. So you need to be aware of that. So the next point to cover is around how many CVs you want. Now, some people will form really strong ideas. I want to see, your 3 best candidates. Others will be talking about, I want to see, a breadth of options. I think one of the mistakes people make here is that they see the volume of CVs as an indication from the effort the recruiter is putting in, and they see the number of CVs being very closely linked to the results that you're looking for. And that has some merit, but I think is flawed in some ways. As I see it, if you're working with a recruiter, spending some money with them, then it's less about the quantity of the CVs. And of course, quality is important, that's almost a given, but it's less about the quantity per se. It's more around the decision making, whether you're seeing 1, 3, or 5 people. How can you be confident those are the right people for you? If I think about 2 of the roles that we've hired for startups in the last month, they've both only seen 1 candidate. So one client hired a fractional chief technology officer from us. The other client hired a head of operations, a chief operations officer. And in both cases, they've only seen 1 candidate, but they felt really confident because of the broader picture we've been able to give them, because of the insight into different types of profiles, even if they've not had conversations, because of the work that we did with them, helping them to think through what they're looking for. That consideration over how many CVs they want is less important than, do I have the confidence the person I'm meeting now is the right one for me? And how has that been validated through the data, the insight, and maybe the other conversations that I've had? So be careful to stipulate number of CVs and not think about that wider picture around what is the information, the insight, the data that you're being given that will give you the confidence that whether you're meeting with 1, 2, or 3 people, this is the right person for you, and you have the clarity you need on that choice. So number 5 of the 6 here is around pricing. Now, I imagine that if you're watching this, most of your experience working with recruiters has been on a percentage of salary basis. So whether your expectations are that you're paying 10%, 20%, 30%, but typically the recruitment industry prices as a percentage of salary. So if you're looking to hire someone at £100,000 a year and they're quoting you 20%, you're asking for 20%, you're going to pay £20,000 as a fee. Maybe that's a contingency fee on a success basis only. So you're paying £20,000 once that candidate's found. Maybe you're working in a retained model, you pay a third up front, so just under 7,000, and then you pay the balance of the 20,000 when the hire is made. Maybe it's split down to thirds, but often the pricing is set as a percentage of salary. And if I'm talking to founders, that's often their expectation. We're going to quote them a percentage. For a long time, that's exactly what I did. And the business that I learned my trade in, a couple of thousand people, it's a really nice and easy, convenient way as a recruitment business leader to manage your workforce, to say we will not go lower than 18%, or we need to improve our average fee from 20% of salary to 22% of salary. When the market's good, that number will go up. When the market's not so good, you'll find it will go down. And the pricing kind of commoditizes recruitment services in a way. It's all about the percentage rather than about the value you're getting, but also I believe is flawed based on some of the scenarios that we've seen. So a couple of kind of illustrations of that. If you imagine that you're recruiting for a DevOps engineer or a head of sales, and there's another business very similar to you looking for a very similar role. Now, you've just raised some VC funding, you're able to pay this person £100,000 a year. The competing business who's looking for exactly the same type of person, exactly the same role, is only able to pay £80,000. Now, from a pricing perspective, if those two businesses go to recruiters, agree on a fee of 20%, you are paying £100,000 salary, you're going to pay a £20,000 fee. Your peer is offering an £80,000 salary, they're going to pay a £16,000 fee. As a recruiter, which role is easier to fill? All things being equal, it's going to be the role at £100,000. So logic dictates that it's an easier to fill role. I should charge you paying £100,000 or a £20,000 fee less. Percentage of salary model means that actually I charge you more for an easier role, and I charge the client that's paying less for a harder to fill role. So you get penalized for offering a salary that is in the top 10, 20% of the market, whereas someone else probably doesn't get the attention that they really need because the recruiter's been forced to underprice to align with this percentage of salary model. So that's one of the challenges with regards to pricing. If you're agreeing percentage of salary, your competitiveness in terms of salary actually exactly sits against the competitiveness in terms of the pricing you might get. One of the other problems is, just bring it back down to you going out to hire for a role now. You're hiring between £80,000 and £100,000 because you want to see a range of candidates, and you've agreed a percentage salary of 20% with your recruiter. So your ideal salary range is to find somebody between £80,000 and £100,000. You really care about the best candidate. You know, you've got a budget. Okay, fine. If you can get away with someone more cheaply, then great. You don't mind paying the money, but you really want to see the best candidate for the job. And your recruiter is probably telling you they're going to find you the best candidates for the job and send you the best candidates for the job. And I'm not saying they're being dishonest, but in reality, where is their ideal salary range? Remembering they are charging you a percentage of salary, it's at the top. Because if I'm working on a 20% fee, if I find you someone at 80, I charge you £16,000. If I find you someone at 100, arguably I'm putting the same effort in, but in this case, I'm getting paid on 20% of 100,000, £20,000 fee, an extra £4,000 or 25% more than if I find you someone at 80,000. I'm not saying only you're going to get CVs from recruiters at 100,000, but all things being equal, logic dictates you're going to get salaries pushed up. You're going to see much more people at the top of the range than you will do at the bottom. When it comes to negotiations on salary, you would hope your recruiter is able to play a role getting things over the line and aligning both candidate and client expectations. But this pricing model will mean that they are encouraged to increase the salary that you end up offering and to nudge you towards a higher number, because they will get, in this example here, agreeing 20% of salary, 20% of everything extra they can negotiate on the candidate's behalf. So if you haven't thought through how percentage of salary might create incentives and drive behaviours, hopefully that highlights something that I think is really important and often overlooked here. What are the alternatives? We work mostly on a fixed fee basis now, and I think increasingly that's something that is much better suited to aligning interests. So you may come to us with a role, you've got a salary range of between 80 and 100,000. We would look at the value to you, the effort we need to put in, and how well placed we are to fill the role. We would quote you a price, which is fixed, often split down as a launch fee and a success fee. And that's clarity to you, predictability in terms of what you're going to spend. And it means that whether someone you end up hiring is at 80, 90, 100, 150 or 50, the price doesn't change. And hopefully what you're seeing is the best candidates rather than simply the most expensive candidates. So be aware in terms of how something like pricing can influence the candidates you might see and whether you're really seeing people representative across your range. Now, the final point here is, I guess, that's sort of a point on activity versus judgment, and partly around the choices, but also how you're valuing what you're getting from a recruiter. If I think about the metrics within a recruitment business, it's often around CVs sent and how quickly you can box off a role. So you get a role registered, right, let's make sure that in 24, 48 hours, we've got 3, 4, or 5 CVs across to that. And if you're running a business at scale, working predominantly on a no-win, no-fee basis, that's kind of what you have to do to make sure you're not spending too much time investing in a role versus moving on to the next one and making sure that you're covering your bets, that you are able to get enough roles covered off so that you will get a return on some of them, even if it's a minority. As a hiring manager, then of course you do want activity. You do want to see CVs and see candidates rather than pay a recruiter just to go and think and explore the market. But I think from talking to many of the founders and investors that we partner with, what they're really looking for is judgment on who the best candidate is. And often a step before that, exactly what role is it I'm looking for? Is how I'm positioning it competitive and aligned with what the market is offering? Are we looking for something that doesn't exist? Are we paying the right money? Are we describing the role in the right basis? Is this an appropriate title? And how would changing something around our positioning allow us to attract a different type of candidate? What difference would offering this role on a remote basis or thinking about a fractional person rather than a permanent person make? There were so many questions that come up in the conversations that I have that aren't measured by how many CVs you're being sent or how quickly those CVs are coming across. And for the founders we work with and what I've seen, outside of the businesses that we partner with, it comes back to wanting confidence and having clarity on the best hires to make, rather than necessarily wanting CVs or measuring things like time to fill. Again, urgency is often a big part of the roles we look at, but is it really a measure of success for you that you get this role filled in 3 weeks versus you get some insight from a recruiter? They help you to judge better what role you're going to hire for, how you're going to go about hiring it, and who you're going to hire. And even if that takes a bit longer, if you end up having someone that in 12 or 18 months time has made a material impact to your business, how important was it that that role was filled in 3 or 5 or 8 weeks? So there's lots more around that activity you might want to think about. I think in reality, is there somebody there that you can partner with effectively, whether they're embedded within your team, whether you're working with them on a one-off basis to help you with that judgment on the best hires to be made. So these are the things we covered. It feels like I've covered a fair bit, and hopefully it'll make sense in terms of how I brought it back to the choices that you're going to make. So I'm not going to go over all of those again, but some of the key considerations are very much around the payment. Also, another key consideration is on whether you're working with one recruiter or whether you're working with several recruiters, and then thinking about what you're instructing them from an urgency and a speed point of view versus the clarity and the confidence that you're thinking through. The thing perhaps I haven't talked about explicitly is around retain versus contingency. So to touch on that very briefly, one of the things that you'll find, and it does link into the one recruiter versus many conversation, if you're working with a recruiter on a retained basis, is they're able to go into market much more transparently with your brand. So we're running a campaign at the moment for a business called Staxi, and being retained with them, being able to put their story front and center is a really powerful thing as both an attraction and also a story to tell candidates that might put them off in some ways. This is an early stage business that is going to be full of ambiguity and uncertainty, and the more candidates can understand that before they click on apply, the more aligned they will be to the stage you're at and the reality of what you need versus what looks good on paper. So working with a business on a retained basis versus no win, no fee can have impact in terms of the way that they present your story to the market, as well as drive some of the incentives and some of the behaviors. So that will hopefully help you make sense a bit more of some of those choices that you're either making consciously or unconsciously, how that may create incentives that you might not be aware of, and how that may drive some of the behaviors that you're seeing from recruiters out there. My hope is, from what we've covered today, that it has started to help you understand why engaging with recruiters can be frustrating at times, but perhaps there are different choices you can make that would make it less frustrating. And although on one level those fees can be a really significant part of your budget, hopefully you can see a bit more clearly where perhaps there is a lack of value from the fees you're paying at the moment, and where there may be an opportunity to get more value that perhaps doesn't link into the way that you might have perceived value before. I would love to know in the comments whether you've watched this live or whether you're watching it on replay, what might resonate with you. If there's any questions that I haven't covered, drop them in below the video and I'll make sure to revisit and come back to it. And if this has sparked something that you want to continue the conversation, you'll find me pretty actively on LinkedIn. So feel free to drop me a message and we'll see where that leads to. So thank you for tuning in. It's Alan Furley, co-founder and CEO of ISL Talent, and look forward to hearing how you found the session. Thanks.